Hello, Energy Funders investors. This is Reed Stiles, VP of Upstream at Energy Funders. Today I'm joined by Jared McGee from Houston Energy. He's their exploration geologist, and he's in charge of the Potomac Prospect. The Potomac Prospect is a 20,000 foot TVD well. It's onshore, but it's on a barge, so it's over water. It's the deepest well that Energy Funders has ever funded. It's an exciting opportunity and a true swing for the fence potential. Now, with this reward obviously comes a lot of risk, and that's why we have experts like Houston Energy and Jared here to help answer your questions and fully understand all of the due diligence and seismic and geology and care that's gone into crafting this deal. It's truly amazing, and I can't wait to share it with you. Now let me pause for a quick legal disclaimer. This is not an offer. All offers are made through energyfunders.com through our private portal. This opportunity is for accredited investors only. Please review the disclosure memorandum, the participation agreement, the legal documents, and the technical documents on the project page to make your own best decision. Remember, you're in charge of your own due diligence. How did you find the Potomac, or what were you looking for to find something this deep?
Reed, for this particular prospect, this was found on a proprietary 3D survey. As far as I know, we're one of the only companies that has it, and that is really the reason it is left. The reason it jumped out at me is because there's a lot of really good deep production in the area at this level, around 17,000 feet. And with the Yorktown prospect, there's a lot of good oil production. I think they found like between 11 and 12 million barrels up there at Northeast Lake Washington. And this is right in the vicinity. It's basically directly south of Yorktown prospect, where there's a lot of really good big hum oil pay in this area. During the 1950s, this was some of the deepest oil production in the history of the United States during that particular time. There's that well there that produced out of like 19,100 feet up there at Northeast Lake Washington, making 800 barrels of oil per day. And so that's kind of the reason I was looking here, is because it's very deep and it's oil, and it's very high a lot of condensate. And right now, as we all know, condensate is the king. But along with that comes a lot of gas. So this particular prospect, when I was looking deep, there was an amplitude that jumped out off the original data we received from Conoco. And that caused our company, to go out there and reprocess the data. And that really brought an uplift to the data, but it is on the original data from Conoco as well, which is essentially the raw data. We will see that here today. It is included in the presentation. But when I was looking at the data, this thing down here just really jumped off the page at me.
Can you just dive a little deeper on what exactly reprocessing is for those that might not know, and why ConocoPhillips has the raw data, but how you're interpreting it a little differently?
Okay. Well, Conoco, actually, I think I mentioned yesterday, Burlington acquired data. I think that I need to re-look at that, but I think it was actually our LL&E that acquired the data, because this is on LL&E fee, just like Yorktown is on LL&E fee. So what happened was LL&E shot all their fee in the late 90s. I think I mentioned Burlington shot it. It was actually LL&E that shot it. So let me restate that and correct it for the record.
Okay.
That it was LL&E that actually shot the data, and then it was sold to Burlington. And then Burlington was sold to Conoco, and that's how we received the data, is through Conoco. But over the course of like the last 15 to 20 years, this has all transpired.
I can actually add a little commentary here, just because I worked at ConocoPhillips. You know, when you're a giant company and you acquire a bunch of smaller companies, you pick up heritage assets, as we call them. And heritage assets are basically just, things that may not be in your core area, but you still keep them on the balance sheet. I mean, if they owned fee acreage down here, then they literally own the minerals. So they're never going to lose it. So it's just an asset. And so I totally understand what Jared's saying, just on this part of the story, where ConocoPhillips could have had this on the balance sheet. It could have just sat there for 10 years, 20 years since the Burlington acquisition, and they didn't really know what to do with it because they just don't have the expertise, and they have too many other assets.
Well, that's exactly right, because as we all, Conoco is a major company right now, and they're not particularly playing this part of the world, but they do have a bunch of minerals here through the LL&E acquisition back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when they acquired LL&E, Burlington, then the Conoco. And when Burlington bought LL&E, they were focused more on deep water. So they had all these prospects onshore, and we actually did a joint venture with Conoco and called the T-Bay area, Terrebonne Parish, and we had, I believe, 6 out of like 7 discoveries in that particular shoot, and we did that between the years 2012 and 2015. That led to us getting this particular data set. That's the reason we were able to move on to this particular area with Conoco. Is through that, through our expertise there and the T-Bay shoot, we were able to find a bunch of reserves on their LLNE fee. And so we started looking in other areas where LLNE has fee as well. And this is one of the areas that LLNE has fee. And they had some proprietary data shot through LLNE. And Conoco is willing to work with us on that. So it really is from our previous success we acquired with Conoco. They will let us come over here and work their data over here as well.
What exactly does reprocessing mean? What are you doing there?
But basically what we do is we send it off to a person who's an expert at going back and kind of, with the advancement of technology, a lot of these surveys were shot in the late 90s, and so technology wasn't as fast, like they weren't able to process the data as fast. And so they originally just shot, we have like an all stack and a mid stack and a far stack, but it's not very crisp and clean. So what they do is they go back and they have these things called the gathers, and they're able to go through the gathers and clean those up and give us a clearer picture of what's going on below the earth. We send it off to a third party. They do it out of our shop, and they have no idea where the prospects are. We just give them the whole data set and say, clean this up, please. And because a lot of times you get the raw data and it's just not, what they do is have to repick velocities, and that's like an art within itself. And that's what gives you a clear image, is when you go back and repick the velocities, get rid of some of the noise on the data. And there's people, that's their expertise in the world, is to go back and clean up these data sets.
Yeah, I think that helps give the investors a little bit of a better understanding of what some of these terms mean. And I know yesterday you hit a few of them when we talked about kind of how seismic works and how the angle works. So yeah, no, I really appreciate that.
Houston Energy, we use the same reprocessing shop pretty much across the board, for whether it's in the deep water where we've had, I think we drilled 29 now out of 32 successful discoveries. We've proven up over 1 billion barrels out there. Whether it's onshore or West Texas, we use the same group of people does all the reprocessing for us.
Perfect.
I just want to make it clear that it's not like, and that we kind of stick to the same core group, because that's what's made this company so prolific over the last 30 years. We just want to keep on continuing the tradition.
No, we appreciate it, and that's one of the reasons why we are so excited to offer 2 prospects. We want to give investors the opportunity to kind of tap into your track record, be able to follow you on multiple projects and not just pick deals, more like give you the whole Houston Energy portfolio.
This prospect's called Potomac Prospect. It's in Plaquemine Parish, Louisiana. It's 11.6 million barrel and 235 BCF potential. It's a 552 acre big hum amplitude with AVO. The amplitude conforms to structure, which is very good for de-risking the prospect. We have analogs nearby. It's a fault-bounded 4-way closure. It's landowner proprietary 3D. It's 2 strings of pipe, and it's a barge job. And the TD is 19,500 feet TVD. And that, I forgot to mention this, but I actually did shoot to the gentleman who did shoot this data set when he was in LLNE, and they did have this prospect identified back. Here's a geomap of the Potomac Prospect. We sit here, right here on the southeast flank of Lake Washington Field. Right over here is northeast Lake Washington, where Yorktown Prospect sits, and that's where all the really prolific deep oil production is in this particular area of the basin. Like I said before, this is some of the deepest oil production drilled in the United States in the 1950s and 60s. Here's a synthetic tie. We're tied into the Amman Oil LLNE A1 well right here, drilled in 1980. Our prospective sand is the L4 sand, and it's right down here. It looks pretty ratty in this well, but it actually is a nice looking sand that will clean up based off our amplitude response. So we come across here. We get this, we across the Texas number 2 well, which saw the interval as well and had some sand. We hit this teal-colored fault, and then we jump down thrown into this fault block here, and there's our prospect sitting right there. You can see this large green fault here is called a listric fault because it's a very large fault. And you can see we jump from the big 2 up here, and the Aminal LLNE A1 well. Down here is the big 2, and this Mecum number 2 well. And so you can see the growth on that fault. It's about 2,500 to 3,000 feet. And so we come directly at dip of that fault, and there's our trap right here. And we know this because we have paleo over here in the LLNE A1 well, and also paleo in the Mecum number 2 well. And we've done a bunch of regional maps through this area as well. Here's a regional amplitude analog map. This is Bay Batiste up here. This particular amplitude up here made 32 BCF, 1.65 million barrels. Over here is Northeast Lake Washington, which is the 29 sand, the Sibcar sand, the stratigraphic sand out in space. This analog made 35 BCF in a million barrels. The prospect sits right here on the southeast flank of Lake Washington Field. You can see this dome right here. This is the outline of salt. It's 552-acre amplitude with AVO. Then we come over here to Bastion Bay. This amplitude here made 325 BCF and 6 million barrels. Let's go to a line going from P to P prime. This is a line P to P prime. You can see over here, see how we have a nice little trough peak amplitude over here on the left side of the screen. And that's the Bay Batiste that made 32 BCF and 1 million barrels, or 1.65 million barrels. You come across here to the middle of the screen, and there's a amplitude here that made 35 BCF and 1 million barrels. Then you come over here to come across to the salt up at Lake Washington, and the prospect sits right down here. Then over here on the right side of the screen is the Bastion Bay End Sand, which made 325 BCF and 6 million barrels we know about. I don't have the production from 59 to 65 in that particular sand, but it's very prolific and it has a nice trough peak signature, very similar to the prospect. This is a full stack here. This is a far stack, and you can see how all these things kind of pop out when you get to the far stack. Here's our prospect, Bastion Bay, this analog over here, and this analog over here. Here's the near stack. So we go from far to near. You kind of see the pop where on the fars, these things, particularly Potomac prospect and the Bastion Bay, are brighter. And then on the nears, they kind of diminish. Actually, all of them go away on the nears. See, there's no amplitude over here, no amplitude over here. This one, the amplitude diminishes, and this amplitude, the amplitude diminishes as well, but they're still present. The amplitude's still present, and that's because it's a that would have to represent a very, very large, thick sand, like you have over here at Bastion Bay, where you have about 170 feet of pay. Over here, you only have about 50 to 60 feet of pay, and over here, you have about 60 feet of pay as well. So in order to have an amplitude down here at this particular depth of Potomac prospect, you'd have to have something that looks similar to the stuff at Bastion Bay, which is about 170 feet thick. So you can see the far near pop. Here's our regional Big Hum L4 map. Up here, once again, this is at Northeast Lake Washington. This is very zoomed out. This is a very large scale map. Each one of these blocks is 1 mile by 1 mile, which is 640. Each one of these blocks is 640 acres. It's not 1 mile by 1 mile, I apologize, but it's one section. So each block is 640 acres. Up here is the Northeast Lake Washington. These wells up here on the upthrown side over here made about 3 million barrels. Come down here, the X1 well, it made 3 million barrels. And over here, this well, the S1 well, made 3.84 million barrels, 5.6 BCF. Over here on the right side of the screen, we have a Peltex well that was drilled, and it was drilled in the 1980s. And out of the very top sand up here, made 1.5 million barrels. Zoom in a little bit. It made 1.5 million barrels and 1.2 BCF and still producing today. But you can see there's tons of sand in this particular interval. And it's also further south than the prospect, which gives you gives you a lot of hope that you're going to find some really nice looking sands over at the prospect as well. Over here, this is the Texas number 2 well. It's a wet well, but it does have a nice sand package in the Big Hum L4 sand. And over here is that well we have our synthetic tie-in, the LLNE A1 well. And that well has a bunch of nice looking sands as well. And here's our prospect right down here in the southeast or southwest corner. We're coming off the salt dome, and it has a nice closure. It has counter-regional dip to the salt, and it's a kind of a nice little looking 4-way closure. Here are the lines from that previous map. This is line A to A prime. Here's the 17 sidetrack number 3 here. This is a full stack. Come across. Here's the X1 well. Jump down thrown. We are tied in to these wells through correlations to the Ammonite Oil and Cockerel number 2 well. Then we jump down thrown to our prospect right here. Here's a far stack. Oops, I'm sorry. And here's the near stack right here. Let me zoom out. So you can see the presence of AVO at the prospect level here, because up here you have a trough peak and trough peak. Here you have a trough peak, and that lower trough peak goes away. So you're seeing the amplitude diminish, which is a good thing. That means you have AVO effect. This is line B to B prime, tying the prospect over the Peltex well. This is a full stack here. Come down thrown, go up thrown to the teal fault, go up thrown to a green fault, come over the purple fault, and we tie directly into the Peltex number 2 well right there. The reason these amplitudes these other wells don't have as pronounced amplitudes as the prospect is just because the pays are relatively thin compared to the prospect, what we expect to find at the prospect. And we've done a bunch of modeling to see how thick we'd have to be in order to get this amplitude response. And we have to have, 170 to 270 feet of pay in order to get that kind of amplitude response. Here's a far. Here's the near. You see here how we have the large amplitude here and the yellow and blue. Then we have kind of another more subtle amplitude below it. This is a map on that more subtle amplitude below us. It's the Big Hum lower, and that's still a 200-acre amplitude. And that particular amplitude, we're able to put in 52 BCF and 2.6 million barrels. And it has a really nice conformance to structure, which gives us another risk reducer to the prospect. Here's a time map for the Potomac prospect. And one thing to notice, here's our amplitude outline in the black. At the very crest of the structure is where the hottest part of our amplitude is. That is also another good sign to help reduce the risk in the prospect, because you do want your hottest part of the amplitude at the crest of the structure. And we're going to show a couple lines here going from D to D prime and E to E prime. Here's D to D prime here. Kind of just a west-east line showing the 4-way closure part of the prospect. You can see how here we have a nice rollover, all, far, near. I skipped a slide, I apologize. Here's another, this is our amplitude extraction, zoomed in at the prospect. Well, here's D to D prime here, E to E prime, and F to F prime. F to F prime goes through, there's two 16,000-foot wells out here, so we know we have a really good control all the way down to 16,000 feet. And we only have to drill about another 2,500 to 3,500 feet below that to see our amplitude. Here's D to D prime, which is west-east. So let's go back to the map. This line here, D to D prime. D to D prime here. Here's E prime to E, which is going from south to north. You can see the nice rollover right here at the prospect level. And this fault is in there, that little kind of pink fault, violet-colored fault. And that is this E prime to E line right here going from south to north. Here's a time map for E to E prime. Here's F to F prime. What's critical about this particular line is that we do have, like I said before, we do have the excellent control all the way down to 16,000 feet, which is going to help us pick a really good pipe point for our well and help reduce a lot of the mechanical risk to the prospect. So we're going to drill down here. We're going to set pipe around 14,000 feet in our well. Then we're going to come down. We're going to cross this green fault right here, and we're going to set at about 16,500 feet. We're going to set another string of pipe, and then we're going to drill on down through the prospect right here, down to like 19,500 feet. So we have really good control, and we know where we're at in the seismic, and that's going to help us drill this well efficiently and with safety. Here's full, far, near on that. Here's the analog one, the 325 BCF and 6 million barrels right here. All I did here was kind of zoomed in at this analog to show you the production, and like I said before, it made 325 BCF and 6 million barrels. Here's the all, far, near. Here are the gathers. This is analog 2. It's a more subtle amplitude, so it's a little bit thinner. Here's the all, the far, the near, and here are the gathers for the prospect. Like I said, this amplitude made 32 BCF and 1.65 million barrels. Here's analog 3. This analog really didn't even pop out until we didn't reprocess the data. It was not in the original data. You can see it's a very, very subtle amplitude. Here's the all, the far, the near, and here's the gather going through it as well. This is a gather reference map for the prospect. Here's the gathers through the prospect, G1 to G1 prime here, G2 to G2 prime here, and G3 to G3 prime here. Once again, here's our incident angle to show you we have plenty of offset at the prospect. This represents over here is angle degrees. We have out this purple on the edges of gathers about 42 degrees. We cut our analysis off right here, kind of where this blue hits, about 30 degrees right here. So you can see how down here you're kind of getting that alligator mouth Christmas tree effect on these gathers. And that's what you're looking for to show you AVO. Here's a wet well here, the Texas number 2 well on the northwest part of this display. Over here in the northeast is the Ammonil LL or AA1 well. This well is a wet well as well, has no amplitude AVO. Down here is an oil well. This is the Peltex well. It's relatively flat going through here, and you wouldn't expect to have real AVO on that because of the thickness of it. It's just not very thick. Once again, here's the the Hillcorp 17 sidetrack number 3. This well made 1 million barrels and 2.3 BCF. You do see there are a couple gathers here with an AVO effect. And the same thing down here with the U.S. Oil X1 well. These wells do have somewhat of an AVO effect going on in a couple of the gathers. So if you compare these gathers to our prospect, here's the prospect gathers here, how we have these gathers, especially on G2 to G2 prime, look extraordinary through here. G3 to G3 prime going through here, look very, very nice. And you go down to the analogs, we look very similar to them. Here's actually a color display of our gathers as well. We took this from the model on the left side over here. This is showing what the gather should look like from 0 to 300 feet of pay. Down here is the same from 0 to 300 feet of pay and color. And you can see our gathers here look most like 240 to 300 feet of pay based off the gathers here in color. If you want to go back, these are the prospect gathers on the right and compare those to the analogs. You can do that as well. You can see we have a nice AVO effect. And this model comes from the Hillcorp LNE 17 sidetrack number 3 well. We do have a detailed report from our model. If I could send that to you as well.
Hey, Jared, quick question. How far is that Hillcorp well in Yorktown from the Potomac?
I think it's 4 to 5 miles. I have to double check that.
But in the grand scheme of things, pretty close, right? I mean,
yeah, it's really, really, really close. We have a lot of control here, and it's not very, I wouldn't really call it a wildcat because there is so much control, but it is a deep well. But we do have plenty of sands in the area, so that's not really a risk on this particular prospect. But they're very, very close. We're one fault block separated from the production, which is very good for a well of this magnitude. Here's our cross plot. This is showing the far amplitude on this bottom scale here versus the near amplitude. The key is this line, this diagonal dash line going through it. You want to be on the right side of it in this quadrant over here. that's where the good pays are supposed to be, in this kind of like northeast quadrant on the bottom, under this dashed line, and that's kind of right where we fall. We fall right where these two particular analogs here both have about 170 to 180 feet of pay. We fall close to them, so that's kind of what we expect at the prospect. Here's that 29, the Sampson well here, has relatively thin sands. Here's the Peltex well right here, the Staleyson 192 number 2 well, and the X1 well right here falls a little flat. And you can see this one down here, it's just a really subtle amplitude, but it does have a lot of good production. And then we have a wet well over here on this side of the line.
Oh, so, hey, Jared, yeah, maybe you can explain real quick why you'd want more far amplitude than near amplitude.
You want a stronger far amplitude because it gives you a better AVO. That is what you're looking for to reduce the risk in these really deep prospects that are amplitude driven. Is you want your fars to be brighter than your nears. You know, sometimes you'll find some of these old fields where they're relatively flat, but on stuff we're drilling today, it reduces the risk greatly if you have a far brighter than the near, and that's just a really big risk reducer. And once again, that's kind of going back to how they acquire the data. Is if you have a representing gas, if you're further out you are, if you have a far amplitude, and then it goes, but you have no near amplitude, that is more of a gas effect. It's called the Class 3 AVO is what you're looking for. That means you have really good rock with high porosity and gas filled, is what it should represent. I mean, sometimes out there you do find the risk to that is that sometimes you find a really, really big sand that is not, that's the risk to those AVO, is that instead of finding a hydrocarbon filled gas, you find a really big, clean sand, and that can also give an AVO effect. But in studies, that's been proven 70% of the time, or more 70 to 80% of the time, especially at this particular depth and pressure, you'd expect to find a gas-filled sand. However, I mean, there are risks to the prospect. Here's kind of a net pay montage of how we calculate the reserves for this prospect here. And what I did is I took what look most alike and kind of used this color bar based off the in sand over here at Bashta Bay and applied it to the prospect. In doing so, I came up with 183 BCF and 9 million barrels. I used the 50 barrels of condensate per million from Northeast Lake Washington. Up there, it's all oil. Most of the production is all oil, so there's very little gas wells. So I assumed it was going to be very high condensate because of all the oil to the north. We did have a petroleum engineer look at it, and that's where we got this recovery factor from, 2,343 MCF an acre foot, which is right here in our recovery factor. Over here is our delta amplitude. What I did is I measured the amplitude, kind of the absolute value of the peak and the trough combined on the amplitudes of all the analogs I showed you today. Those analogs are listed here, and those are also the stuff I've kind of shown you before. Our prospects is way out here because it's a really strong looking amplitude, and we look most like the C and D, which is the end sand over here at Bashta Bay. And this is where the prospect sits right here. So we expect to find a really thick package of sand with hydrocarbons in it. And we did a delta T, which is a measurement. The delta amplitude is a measurement of the amplitude, the strength of the amplitude, whereas a delta T is the thickness from the middle of the center of the trough to the center of the peak. And that came out to be, 38 milliseconds, which is equivalent to about 158 feet based off the analogs in the area. And once again, here are the analogs listed that we use to calibrate these Excel spreadsheets in. This is our big hum upside scenario using like 300 feet thickness of net pay, 241 BCF and 12 million barrel potential. Like I said, here's the original data we received from Conoco. This is like what I was looking at when I found the prospect originally. Here's the map that came out to be. It came out to be a 420-acre amplitude. And these are the same D to D prime and ED prime lines as we had earlier in the previous displays. You can see here, I was looking at this. I was looking at the FARs when I was kind of looking for amplitudes. I'm sorry, the FARs versus the nears and the mids to see an AVO effect. You can see how this amplitude really stands out in this particular data set. It's more of a peak trough, but on this particular data set, the phase was a little bit different, and all the analogs were very peak trough. But it's very distinct looking. Here's the far, the mid, and there's the near on this kind of D to D prime line. Oops, sorry. Here's E prime to E. Here's the amplitude here in the full stack, far stack, mid stack, and nears. You can see looking at this thing, it really stood out to me when I was looking at it. I mean, in both directions, kind of north, south, and east, west. On the full stack, it's very, very anomalous, meaning that it really stands out when you're looking at, compared relatively to everything in the background, it really looks a lot different and a lot more perspective. Here's a cross section just showing you how we tied all the wells in. This is going from northeast Lake Washington up here over on the east side where we have the excellent Big Hump production and the oil sands. Jump across this green colored fault, then you jump across this teal colored fault and go into the prospect right here. Here's the X1 well, the S1 well, and the 17 sidetrack number 3. You can see all the excellent oil production here. 1 million barrels, 2.3 BCF, 3.84 million barrels in L2 sand up here, 6.6 BCF, then 3 million barrels and 5.4 BCF in X1 well. The sands correlate. We'll jump down here to the LNE Eminal AA-1 well and the Cockrell number 2 wells. And here's the L4 sands here in these wells. And then we jump down, thrown to our prospective fault block. We expect our to come in around 18,400 feet at the top of our sand. This is just all the paleo in the area because there's a lot of detail that goes into these these prospects. I just want to show you the bugs we're looking for. Are the paleo is actually like a bug they found back in the day, and the bug we're looking for here is the Big Hump sand. And here's the Big Hump sand here in the Ammon oil well. It comes in there at 17,210, 16,524, right here in the Texas number 2 well. And you can see the Bass and Mecum wells never get down there because they're down thrown to that large expansion fault, and we're not drilled deep enough to see it. And here's some of the wells over here. This is the Gulf number 2 well, Phillips well, the Pan Am well. It's showing that this large fault comes all the way across here, that regional down to the south fault. Then here we look at the velocity comparison. Salt velocities are 14,000 feet per second. The Potomac velocity is 11,600 feet per second because we don't believe it's salt. Kind of based off looking at these velocities, the interval velocities and the RMS velocities of the prospect. You can see how here, let me zoom in real quick. You can see how these here's your velocity scale over here. Here's where the prospect sits. You see here you have your higher velocities, which represent salt. Same thing with the RMS. Higher velocities are over here. Potomac prospect sits right there.
So Jared, is the salt dome the reason that it's so complex out here as far as all the faulting, why exactly is it so complex?
It is because it's between a couple of large salt domes here. Like these over here where we're at, you're coming right off the dome of Lake Washington, and it is more complex. But we have like what's called counter-regional dip. So the actual high is away from the salt, and it kind of dips back into the salt. So that means it was a very old structure, and that gives you a lot of hope that if we have a large sand there filled up over the course of time, and that these faults, the oil and gas migrated up these faults from the dome. Does that make sense, Reed?
Could you add a little commentary about why a salt dome yields complex geology around it? Maybe just a quick briefing for our investors.
Oh, no problem. Because what happens is the salt actually comes up after a lot of the sands were deposited. And in this particular case, the salt, all the sands were laid out here, and when it was like a deep water environment, and then the salt came up from below and kind of pushed everything up. And so it's almost like you're squeezing toothpaste up and putting a bunch of pressure on these beds. And what happens is when these beds are broken, they all kind of crack like a mirror. If you were to basically take like a stone and throw it at a mirror, and it would crack into a million pieces. That's what happens around the top of these salt domes. And then you get away from the top of the salt dome, because we're away from the top of the salt dome here, but you still have some of these cracks that extend all the way across there, all the way across your mirror. And then you have like right where the very top is, how if you were to take a rock and throw it right at the top of a mirror, there's a bunch of fragmented little compartments. But then when you get away from that top of the mirror, you have these larger, bigger compartments. So we're kind of like in the larger, bigger compartment area if you were to take from a mirror standpoint. Does that make sense?
It's a great example. And then also on that part of the slide where you show chaotic seismic, I think that helped explain to investors that that's why it's so chaotic, because there's a lot of stuff happening around those salt domes. And so, yeah, I think you had a great example or two in there. Yeah, there you go. Yep, that last one. Yeah, so the chaos right there is because you're right next to the salt dome. And so we're kind of experiencing faults all around it that are trapping. There we go.
I really like this display here and this kind of regional line.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of one image through the salt. So, I mean, you got to remember this is not clearly defining the entire salt body, but it's showing, see how we have this really strong looking event right here where my cursor's at? That's called the base of salt. And we know that because we have a bunch of penetrations in the field that drill down through this. And actually, we do have one penetration that drilled down through the base of this on the south side of the dome that we could tie this base of salt to. And we call it chaotic stratigraphy below this because that well is an Amoco well. It was drilled through the salt, and we have a dip meter on it, and it doesn't have like a domal shale. A lot of these will have like what's called a domal shale, which means you won't have any sand at all below the salt. And this particular well, the Amoco well, there's some ratty looking sands in it, going up and down the well from the time it gets through the salt all the way to TD, like at 20,000 feet. And we have a dip meter in that well, and the dips are changing back and forth all throughout those sands. And that's why we call it chaotic stratigraphy, is because it's not a domal shale. A lot of times you expect to find a domal shale, but this particular area, there's still sand present, but it's just going back and forth, being dipped back and forth, because when the salt came up from below, it kind of moved everything around right near it. And so we're off to the flank of the salt, which is a good spot to be at. And we're kind of dipping back into it. You can see here how the dip kind of is going back towards the salt. That's called counter-regional dip to salt. And that's a good indicator of a good trap and like an old structure. So it really helps out in limiting the risk to our prospect.
So it makes it pretty obvious that you could easily have a seal on that from that chaotic stratigraphy, right? Because it's so shaly. And so on I guess that's the east or western side. Yeah, you definitely could see some kind of seal. And then on the eastern side, you hope the seal is just stratigraphic based on the other faults or structural.
You kind of see it. We have rollover in all directions here.
Oh, right. There we go.
See it right here on this particular slide, how it rolls from east to west. And it closes off. And your hottest part of the amplitude is the very crest of this structure. Let me go back to that real quick on one of these other displays.
Which logically speaking makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, that's what you want, and that's what you hope to find. this is our time map. So basically, the crest of the structure is right here. And this is also where the hottest part of the amplitude is. Let me go to slide 4. See how the hottest part of the amplitude sits right here? That's the crest of the structure. And it's right here as well. And you kind of see this amplitude outlined in black right there. That's from this slide here. And that's called down dip conformance to structure. That's another de-risker whenever you're looking at any of these prospects in the Gulf Coast, these amplitude prospects, is you want a pretty good down dip conformance. The better your down dip conformance is, the higher chance you'll have hydrocarbons. And so you can see like D to D prime, like I said, we got this chaotic stratigraphy over here. There's a fault coming off that. It's kind of dipping, and kind of see how that rolls over right through here. Then right here on ED prime, this is that large listric fault that's leading out in front, but then we have a nice rollover here in the north to south direction as well. These are this is pretty rare to find something like this still left in the Gulf of Mexico of this size. Kind of rolls over east to west here, and then north to south here, and that's why it's called a four-way closure. And you just don't find very many of those nowadays. And most of them have been drilled. And we, like I said, fully subscribed. So we should be drilling this about the fourth quarter this year, either fourth quarter this year or first quarter next year.
I guess my questions are all about kind of the operation and practicality. How long do permits in the swamps take, and what does this prospect actually look like from a satellite view, or can you describe the scenario? How would we produce the well, that kind of stuff? So these really are like swamps, basically.
Yes, sir, they are. For this particular prospect, it sits right here in section 3. All these points right here are just little soundings of the water depth. We've had people go out here and look at the water depth. And right now, I think what we're going to do is over here is this is called Empire over here. And there's this Grand Bayou, which we could come down and get a rig in. So we're going to come down through here, come down, come over here, and we're going to set up at that old location. There's that well here that did not work. We're going to set up there, that 16,000-foot well, and kick it to the southwest. And you can see on this particular map, our location is going to be our surface location is right here where my cursor is, and we have 2 lines to pick from. So we're actually very fortunate. There's a line right here going from northeast to southwest. It's a TGP line. Then we have a large chevron 20-inch line going right here from west to east. So you're talking about 1,500, 2,000 feet away from 2 lines, which is very lucky being in the middle of nowhere. So we're very fortunate to have the option that the hookup cost should not be that bad.
How do you get oil and water out from this location?
I got to barge it. We'll barge it out most likely.
So what does the facility look like? Is it pretty big with a lot of tanks?
You'll have a pretty good sized facility based off the condensate ratio you get from your initial test.
Wow. Okay. How do you get out there? Do you have to go by boat every time?
You have to go by boat every time.
So I guess the important part is you have to have deep enough water that you can get a rig out there, but you don't want it to be too deep that it's a hazard, right? So it's kind of, I see why you would have to go out there and figure out the depth all the way through.
Yeah, and what we're going to have to do is we have to do some dredging here, and that's one of the reasons this well is so expensive is because we actually have to come out here and kind of go back through here and kind of clean this out right through here.
Wow.
And that's why the permitting takes so long. It's because you actually have to come out here and do some work and have a gentleman come out here and kind of clean out the slip to make it so it's like 7 feet deep all the way out through here.
Okay.
And that's why it's expensive so high.
But Yorktown doesn't have this problem, right?
No, it's a lot closer and there's actually some wells that have been drilled out there more recently. This one actually, the last well drilled in this particular area was in the 50s and 60s, like right near the prospect. So that's why you have to go out here. Over the last like 50 to 60 years, it kind of filled up with sediment, and nobody's really been out here.
Is dredging really expensive? What kind of device does that work?
I'm not really sure. I mean, I've seen them here in Texas from like up there looking at south of Kingwood. They've had some dredging things out there. It looks like a little barge, I believe, but I'm not particularly sure, Reed. That's really not my area of expertise. I wish I could
Oh,
help you
no
out
problem.
more, but I've never really had to go out there and do the dredging.
Oh, no problem. I Googled it, saw some stuff. So let's say best case scenario, Energy Funders buys in, we're drilling and end of the year. How long does it take to do all this work and put it online? Is it faster than you would think, or is it probably a 6 month facility and pipeline and all that stuff? I mean, kind of what's y'all's timeline on a project like this?
For Yorktown, it's probably more like 6 to 9 months. On this particular prospect, it'd be about a 9 months before we're hooked up. But this particular prospect is a little bit different than Yorktown because this prospect, you'd expect to flow about 25 million a day minimum, maybe up to 40 million a day, and a couple thousand barrels of condensate a day when it starts coming online. So when it comes on, it's going to come on very quickly, and they're going to have a lot of production. Like it's very similar to that prospect Thunder Bayou that Petroquest drilled in
Hmm.
Vermilion Parish. It's about a 20,000 foot production, and they're producing that right now about 40 million a day, and I think it's 1,800 barrels condensate a day. So we expect to have something around 25 to 40 million a day and a couple thousand barrels condensate as well per day.
So when we're running barges out here to get the production, I mean, we're talking about daily trips, I'm guessing.
For this particular deal, yes, because 2,000. I mean, I don't know exactly how many. They'll probably have a couple thousand barrels worth of tanks on the barge, but like you said, they'll have to come out once a day.
Wow. This is a cool one, man. This is a next level for us as far as funding. What?
This is a really
Uh,
impactful prospect. I mean, you don't get a lot of shots to drill this kind of well, especially for this kind of price. You don't get this kind of return on your investment in the grand scheme of things anywhere in the Gulf Coast. Even deep water, you don't get this type of ROI for the most part.
okay, so let's break down who's involved in this project. So who are there some names that we would know, or are there some parties that are important?
Well, the largest uh, investor in Theol is also in this prospect and is a majority owner in the prospect as well. And they were the largest investor in Theol, and they're taking a large portion of this prospect. Then also a couple of the other companies that were involved in Theol are involved in this well as well, and then Combined Resources in this particular prospect. Catexas is the large owner in this particular prospect. Um,
How much is HE taken?
we're taking 5%.
Okay, and who's operating?
Houston Energy. Nick
Okay,
Rezzavani is our driller here. He was at Marlin for several years, and then he was at ADTI before that. So he has a ton of experience drilling these types of wells.
so if a person came in and is a majority working interest owner in this, how much due diligence did they do, or what were some important questions for them before they made that commitment?
They wanted to confirm it wasn't salt, like what we've shown before using the velocity panels. That was one of the questions people had. Another question, people wanted to really look at the gathers and look at them hard to make sure that you do have an image all the way down to 20,000 or 18,000 feet here, and we do, like I showed with the gather panel and the incident angle. Like I said, we do have good data out here to like 40 degrees almost. We cut our analysis off at 30. So in this particular prospect, that's kind of like the things they were looking for. And also somebody coming in to look at this is probably, they came in to look for like a week or so, and they'd map it up and spend about a week working on the prospect themselves when they came in here to do their due diligence for the prospect.
Okay.
So they didn't just come in and look at it. They came in and looked at it. They came in and looked at where could the oil come from, how could it migrate up through the trap, the migration pathways, so the prospect could be there. They looked at the structure to see how sound the structure was. Is it in all directions, north, south, east, west, northwest, southeast, southeast, or southwest, northeast, to see, is it a true four-way closure? And they all came to the same conclusion I did. It is. And then they also looked at the amplitude just to see, is this an AVO? Is it truly an AVO? Does it have merit? And everybody who's in the prospect came back to the conclusion, yes, it does. And even parties that did not participate in this prospect, who spent a lot of time on it, still concluded that it does have AVO with amplitude.
How would you put a probability of success on this, and kind of where's your thinking, or what have other people told you as far as their chance of success based on just pure geology and looking at all the wells in the area?
It depends on who you talk to. If you talk to a person who is a geophysicist, like a true geophysicist, and they're going to look at it and look at basically the amplitude only and how the amplitude looks structure, they're probably going to risk it like 50%. But then you got to incorporate mechanical risk and all the other stuff that comes along with it. And so a lot of people end up risking it at the end of the day between 25% and 30% PSABS. Like 30% PSABS is why I believe most people risk that. Like you're most likely to have hydrocarbons there 3 out of 10 times.
I think the cool thing about this prospect is it's really a 0 or a 1. I mean, if there are hydrocarbons here, we're going to see payback. We're going to see big returns. I mean, at this depth and that much sand, I just can't imagine that you would go down there and find a thin sand with hydrocarbons in them. That just doesn't make sense. It's either going to be filled with hydrocarbons or it's going to be wet.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's either going to be huge or it's going to be nothing. I mean, that is, so it's like a 50-50 roll of the dice here. I mean, you could either have something huge or you end up with nothing. But it is very exciting because you could get 20, 30, possibly 20, 30 times your money back, which is very, very intriguing.
All right. Well, thank you, Jared, for showing it to me. I greatly appreciate it. I know it's been a long haul showing 2 prospects, but. And that's it for the Potomac. I mean, wow. What an opportunity. What a prospect. A true swing for the fence type of deal with an operator that we've had a great experience with so far in the Thiel. If you'd like to review the disclosure memorandum, the participation agreement, the legal documents, the technical presentation, and many other technical documents, including economics, please log on to energyfunders.com. Thank you.